I'm Dan Anderson, Associate Professor and Extension Specialist at Iowa State University. Today I'm going to be talking about manure application equipment, especially around engineering challenges for swine manure application. Whether you have a pit, a lagoon, or an outdoor tank, they're really a storage vessel, and we think of those as how do we get from the point in time we are now to when we really need to use them. So depending on the weather conditions, if it's outdoor, maybe we have to watch what happened for rainfall this year and manage accordingly and push our timing a little bit. With deep pits, it's really a consistent production volume, right? There's a roof over it, keeps rainfall out. And then in those realms, because maybe we have a covered storage or we're outside with varying different surface areas between a vat or a lagoon, we change the ammonia volatilization. So more surface area tends to mean more nitrogen loss. But other than that, most of the systems to me are going to be relatively similar. I might have different agitation challenges. Dropping a agitator in a deep pit where the pigs are probably still above it. I worry a little bit about hydrogen sulfide, make sure I'm ventilating that barn appropriately during agitation. If I'm outside in a vat, probably not as much of an issue. There might be hydrogen sulfide coming out. I'd want to set my agitator on upwind so that the hydrogen sulfide is moving away from me if I'm the applicator. And with lagoons, the real challenge is they get pretty big, so we might need a boat or something out there to help work up some of those solids, which tends to be where the phosphorus is, to make sure we're getting it to the field. And whether we're using a tank or a drag line is really a decision oftentimes of where my fields are located. If they're right next to the barn and the rates are high, I'm almost always going to pick a drag line. It tends to be a more cost-effective system. Most of these, the manure is always flowing to the applicator. If I'm using a tank, I have to go to and fro, and half the time it's empty, unfortunately. So maybe not as advantageous. But sometimes on low-rate fields, when we hit 2,000-3,000 gallons an acre, tanks are still tend to be cheaper, just because it's more sets of a drag line. You have to move that equipment around. But so it really depends on your specific instance on which you pick. As far as surface application or injection, when we're working with swine manure, especially if it's high ammonium swine manure, we really want to make sure we're doing some sort of injection. Surface application tends to cause a lot of ammonia loss at the time of application. So especially with swine manures where we really have a lot of nitrogen in the ammonium format application, it's not preferred. Most of the time for me, at the rates we're going with lower rates, 2,000 to 4,000 gallons an acre, vertical till does a nice job of getting at that in the ground. If you're working with gestation fairing manure or from a lagoon, that might not be enough incorporation to get it all worked in quickly, but you can always add more injectors. Swine manure is sort of unique in the spectrum of manure. The amount of manure we generate per pig has tended to decrease, maybe from 1.4 gallons per pig per day down to closer to 1. And with that, we've seen nutrient concentrations, nitrogen, go from in the neighborhood of maybe 30 to 40 up to 60, 70, and maybe sometimes 90. And because of that, we have to hit a much lower application rate than we used to. We need to either slow our flow rate down, which we tend not to like to do. We want to get it done quickly, or drive a little faster through the field. So one of the things we've tended to see is people switching to vertical till injectors. They require a little less draft force, can move a little bit quicker. That's also related to some challenges about uniform distribution. So if you think about your house, if we want equal pressure, equal flow at different showers on different levels, we control the pipe size to get there. And that should work on manure spreaders too, but manure is not clean. It has lots of solids in it, so we can only get so small before we run into trouble. And that means we had to think a little bit harder about how do you actually get uniform flow. So when you look at maybe old spreaders, you'll see a distributor that's basically a bucket with holes on the side. Those tend to not be super effective for swine manure anymore. In terms of uniformity across the back end, I think that's where we see a lot more issues, and like we talked about with the distributor and the engineering behind that is extremely important. And it matters a lot because you're thinking, I put on the amount of nitrogen I need, 3,000 gallons an acre, but if all of it flows out one row, and not the row next to it, you see really yellow corn and streaky corn in your field, and that's often a distribution problem. The other thing you can start to think about is, am I trying to hit a nitrogen rate or a phosphorus rate in this field? So if I am pushing the level of phosphorus I need, maybe I'm going to dial that back and think about it as a fertilizer system where manure is a component, but not the whole thing. So complementing with commercial fertilizers appropriately. I know there's some ambition to do precision application with manure, and I think we're getting a lot better at it. We can do real-time flow mapping. You could do flow control quite accurately and change, I would say, on the fly, but truthfully, more probably in zones in your field. And then we've seen a few companies come out with real-time nutrient sensing while you're applying. So when you think about hitting rate, calibration is still important, but almost every manure system is going to have a flow meter measuring the volume. So as long as you have a GPS on your tractor, for the most part, check your calibration, make sure it feels about right, but they tend to be more accurate than you can recalibrate. So in terms of matching field conditions, there's a few things to think about. For the most part, we've had dry falls. We can easily get that amount of manure in the ground. If it tends to get a little bit wetter, you might have to think about reducing some rates. And normally I don't think about that with deep pit manure, but occasionally with lagoon manure, that might be more than we can incorporate at any one time, and we might have to back down. One of the most important things with any fertilizer is creating a record of how it performed in any weather condition. If we want to make a better fertilizer decision next year, we have to understand how the manure performed for us. When I think about records and work with farms on how to make a better decision next year, seeing when they put manure on, what the weather was shortly after, what the weather of the early spring growing season was, is extremely important to tailor the decision to your specific farm. Having good records, especially for a field over a longer period of time, are a way to help us really improve decisions on what this field needs to tailor to its production potential and the weather we might expect this year. So there's a few challenges we often see with application. The first one I'm going to mention is timing. We know that we want to try as close to applying when the crop is growing as we possibly can. Some years that's more challenging than others, especially in states like the Midwest, where we occasionally get some pretty wet springs. If we get a dry spring or average spring, timing between well-timed manure in the fall and the spring works out great. If it turns into a wet spring, trying to be later to that 50 degrees and cooling, much more important. If you are forced onto that earlier side, they sell some products, nitrification inhibitors, from various companies. The last thing that I sometimes see is we set up our injection equipment and we try and manage it all the same. But the truth is the headlands often get a lot more traffic during the harvest season. They're a little bit harder, and getting good injection in those areas isn't nearly as simple as getting it in the field.